Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super excited today because I have Mark LeBlanc on the line. Say hello, Mark.
Hey Ed, hey guys, how's it going?
Well, it's going well, and actually, I'm excited. So we've all been stuck at home a little bit longer than we've liked, and one of the things that Mark has been up to is he's taken the game we worked together, Monkey Jump Games and Pencilforth Games, made Heroes Welcome, Merchants of Dragon Reach, and he has taken it and converted it into Tabletop Simulator. And so after watching this video, you can go play, but I hadn't actually seen somebody go through that process, and I thought it would be really great since a lot of publishers and designers want to bring their games to Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia or whatever to have a quick call, not a like detailed rundown of every single feature, but just an overview to make it a little less daunting when you're like, oh, I want to bring my game over. So, with that introduction, I was hoping, Mark, you could take us through it a little bit and how you set it up, because this was the first game you did on it as well, right?
Yeah, totally. Um, I do have a little bit of advantage in that, like, I'm a professional video game developer, so.
That's
Um,
true. That's true.
but I have not messed with Tabletop Simulator very much, and so it involved working with new tools in a new language and stuff like that. But that was fun. All right.
Yes,
Anyway, I'm going to share
and
screen.
Mark's a substantial video game developer, but we will keep on plowing through.
So I'm going to try and share screen here. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah,
And this is Tabletop Simulator. For those of you who don't know what Tabletop Simulator is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It gives you a virtual tabletop. Here, I'm just going to go ahead and make a single player game. I'm just going to play around locally, and I just have a save game that's just got an empty table on it.
And
Here's an empty table.
You if you download Steam or look at Tabletop Simulator, you can get this. It's a free app you can install.
It's actually not free. It's $20.
Oh, it's $20. Oh, and maybe I spent
$20.
I've had it for so long. I apologize.
It was on sale like a couple weekends ago, but I think it's
okay.
not.
But
so
Welcome's
for
free.
example, Heroes Welcome's free on the game on Tabletop Simulator once you have Tabletop Simulator. So you can just sort of I can start to add components to the table. Like if I want some dice, I can just throw a D12 on there. See, now I have it. Okay.
And that was the objects button you went to there?
Yeah, I went to the objects button. And I just put a D12 on there, and look, now I have a D12, and I can pick it up and shake it to roll, or I can just roll it, and stuff like that.
This is all the simulator stuff, and that
Yeah.
top bar is your key. Is that so? If I just come in, I hit create single player game, blank table. That top bar is my big nav. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's also these tools here. Mostly you're just going to use the grab tool, which is like the pick things up and throw them. I can also use like the F key to flip things over, or the R key to just roll. And you'll notice that like when I mouse over the thing, it tells me what the value is of the die, which is pretty handy. So all right, so I have this blank slate, right? You can add cards to it, and they have a underneath the objects menu, they have under components, they have a bunch of like standard components that you can just throw in. You can run an RPG, you can play poker, you can do all kinds of things. But I wanted to bring my game in, and so the first thing I had to do, of course, is bring the board in. So I went over to components. I'm going to do a custom board here. Okay, and then it's going to browse. I'm going to look for here. I'm going to find my. It's very good to have the print assets for your game if you're going to bring it in, and it's even better to have the source assets. If you are the actual graphic designer of the game, you're going to have a leg up on doing.
And so just to back up, you have prior to this, you at least should have access to all the art files you intend to bring in a folder that is named well and clearly.
Right.
Because you're going to be adding white stuff to the game, to the world, and then putting your art on top of the white stuff, right?
Right. Exactly. And so the first thing you're going to be confronted with is this choice, and this choice is like whether or not to send your art to the cloud, or whether you just want to keep a local reference to the art. And my recommendation is that you keep it local for the time being. And the reason for that is that once it's up in the cloud, you can't change it. You have to put it up again, and then you have 2 copies and stuff like that. So if you ever have to make a change to your art, you're going to end up with multiple copies, and you're going to have to delete some or whatever. But eventually,
when you actually go to release,
all right, so you do that, and I'll talk about that in a second. So here we go. Here now we have, all of a sudden, we have the Heroes Welcome board. I don't know why it's floating over the table, but there it is. And if I unlock it, maybe it'll fall onto the table, and then I can relock it. Locking it just means that people can't pick it up and throw it, um, and
And just
things like
to stop on that for a second, if you definitely before you start making a game, play a couple games first as a player.
Oh
And
yeah,
there's a
definitely.
huge library, but the thing you'll find is it really is that simulator where like you can pick anything up, you can flip the table, you can move things around, you can roll them, and getting used to those controls and what the player experience is will help you know like, oh, I should lock this to the table, or oh, I want that, etc.
And also try to find a game that's newer on the list of DLC because or on the workshop, because then you'll find games that are using some of the more new features of Tabletop Simulator. Um, for example, Heroes Welcome is brand spanking new. You can try that.
Check it out, newest
Yeah.
possible.
So here's the board, and so I have a problem that. So you'll notice on my game, I have like places, and a lot of games do this. I have places on the edge of the board where like cards sort of want to hang off the edge of the board, and the standard Tabletop Simulator board is super thick, right? And so if I'm just gonna get a random card object. I'm just gonna just get some card. I'm just gonna get some regular guy standard playing cards. Here we go.
Boom, right there.
Standard player cards, and we can. And one cool, I can deal a card off. I can flip it over, but if I put it here, it's going to hang off like that, which is kind of no good, right? So what I ended up doing is I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. So now I have a 51 card deck. I can undo that. That's very handy. You can rewind time. But anyway, all right, I'm going to take these. I'm going to pick this deck and put it over there. So what I ended up doing is instead of using the standard Tabletop Simulator board, what I ended up doing is painting the board onto the table. So I'll show you how I did that. So I'm going to delete this board. And first I'll show you my, let's see if I can find it. Here's my tabletop texture. I have 2 boards in my game. So I just found, I downloaded this red felt texture, and I just painted. Oops, that's in a different picture. I just painted my board in Photoshop. I composed it onto the table, and you'll notice I'm going sideways, and that's because you'll see the standard table they offer you. So now I'm going to make a table, and it's going to be a custom rectangle. And now I'm going to find that. Hopefully, I can find that. And I'm going to stick it on.
And so one of the things, I would highlight, especially if you're, not an engineer, but in general, a lot of this is trial and error. A lot of this is like, oh, okay, well, I brought that in, but now everything isn't.
Yeah, I didn't like it, so I have to bring it in again. Exactly. Right. It's the number of times I have rebuilt my stuff is many. So now we have, you can see the game sort of as it was. You can see it started to take shape. Where I have the board painted on, and now I can do things like hang cards off the edge of the board, and it's great. Now, one thing you can't do with this is if I hold the Alt key over a game component, it gives me a nice square on what we engineers would call an orthographic view of the component, so you can really tell what it is. And that doesn't work. I'm mashing the Alt key now on the board, and of course it's not going to do that because it's just part of the table.
And so if you happen to be a Tabletop Simulator dev who's watching this video, giving developers the option to have a completely flat custom board would be a really nice advantage to you.
Really nice. Now, there are other options I could have done, right? I could have imported that board as a card.
Sure.
And made it a giant card, lock it to the table, and done it that way. I ended up painting it on. And so, but the nice thing is, like, if I got these cards on the board and I'm just like holding down the Alt key and I can just sort of like surf around and see all these cards. If I had the board as a card, I would be in between each of these cards having a giant board in my face. So,
right.
So
and
that
you can also make custom camera angles and other things that help orient, so you don't always have to do that, at least for the game board.
Right.
But,
so, So now so the first phase of getting things is just getting all your components in, right? And so one of the things you need to think about, and let's just actually go and look at all of the custom components that are available to you. So here's the list of custom components. There's a board which we've looked at. Now there's tiles and tokens. There's decks and cards. There's dice, models, asset bundles, which I'm not going to talk about, PDFs. So let's talk about these. So like most of your cardboard things are going to be tiles, tokens, or cards, or maybe decks. And the difference between a card and a deck is if you want to, here, let's just do a deck right now. So I'm going to import a deck, and I'm going to find, let me see if I can find my, well, let me just see if I can find my decks for one of my games. All right, so yeah, sure. I'm going to import a deck. And so first it's going to ask me for the file that's the faces. I'm going to show you the file that's the faces of the card. So this is my customer deck for Heroes Welcome. Okay, and you'll notice that it's one big image with the cards in a 4x4 grid. You can make it any grid that you want, although there's some limits on the total size of the image. And so I have this image, and it's called Customer Friends. So I'm just going to...
And you mentioned Photoshop. For those who don't have Photoshop, another much cheaper application that you can use is Pixelmator. There's some other ones.
Oh, Pixelmator, GIMP, I think.
Yeah, you're just getting a big canvas and placing your images on it.
Yeah. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to pick local. And then so my cards, so if you want to have a single back, you would just upload the image for the back of the card, right? And that's a very common case. This case happens to have a custom back. So because my cards they all have the same back except for one. So I just made another grid of all of that back except for the one. And now I'm going to upload that.
And an interesting side note is the way these cards are laid out is much more like how a printer would lay out your cards for print. If
Right.
you're typically a publisher that's handing off, you probably have all of your cards in a PDF where it's just card as individual pages. So you'll then be doing this process of laying it out in a grid, more akin to what you'd get back from a manufacturer.
So there's also a tool that you can use that Tabletop Simulator provides you that will make your grid, and you can drag images into the individual slots.
Oh, that's good.
And it'll make that image for you. And it is a little bit different from a print file in that there's no bleed, right? You want all your stuff to be tight together. All right, so I mentioned that my thing is a 4x4 grid, so I'm just going to tell it the dimensions of my grid. And so I said it's 4x4, so it's going to chop it up into 16 cards. And I actually have to tell it the number of cards also, because I might not have all 16, right? I might decide I might have a 4x4 grid, but I only have 15 cards. So the bottom right one, the last one's not used. So I would tell it just bring in the first 15. But I'm going to tell it to bring in 16.
And you can't type that number in; it's a slider.
I think it's a slider. Yeah. Oh, and I accidentally misclicked it. Oh, can I? No. Yeah. I think it's a slider. Have fun. But we can talk about ways to typing. And then sideways. No. That means I do have unique backs. So I should click that. What this means is my source images are sideways. So I'm not sure which rotation they are expecting, but if for some reason my images are not sideways, so I will.
And I assume if you click on or highlight over those question marks, it explains stuff.
Yes. Is your deck sideways? Yeah, but it's not really. It does. It's not always helpful. And then this is a box that you generally want to check, which is basically like when the card's in your hand. What in someone else's hand, what do you want to see? When the card's basically hidden to you but not to other people, what do you want it to show? And I like to show the back of the card. The other option is to show the last card in the sequence or the last image in the sequence. That's the default, which is, I think, weird. I think showing the back is better. So anyway, I'm going to import this, and it's going to load it. And here we go.
Pretty snappy too.
Yeah. So now I have my deck. It's got 16 cards. I can take them off, I can flip them over, and you can see my cards.
And presumably the last one there, great art by Dustin Faust there. The last one is that.
That's me out. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I just use the F key to flip the whole deck over, and you can see the bottom line. So there you go. And that's example of importing a deck. Now you can also import a single card, but the nice thing about importing a deck is that it understands that as a single image, as it understands it's a deck. When you group it up, I just use the G key there, now I have a deck. This is a deck of 16 cards. It's a single object. I can drag it around. I can pull one off. Um, and I can shuffle it. Which is weird for this deck because this deck's not intended to be shuffled. I can do things like deal one to every player, and now I have one in my hand.
And all the things that Mark is doing right now, this is like what every single player has access to when playing.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so and I can just group them up again and shuffle them again. So that's just importing cards, and so you're gonna have to make some decisions about what kind of thing is your thing, right? Like, is it a card, or is it a tile, or is it a token, or is it a figurine? And we'll talk. So figurine is basically a standee, and maybe later I'll give you a tour of Heroes Welcome. But the interesting ones are cards, tiles, and tokens. A deck is just multiple cards imported all at once. And you're gonna have to think about whether my thing is a card or a tile or a token. If you want your things to shuffle together and group together, you probably want it to be a deck. Which basically means you're a bunch of individual cards. If it's just one card, you might just want to import it as a card, and it's going to be an infinitely thin thing. If you want it to have thickness, it's going to be a tile. So tiles, if we look at the imports, tiles can be square or hexagonal or circular or rounded on the corners, which is nice. They can have a front and a back image, and they can have a thickness. And then you can decide whether tiles of the same type can stack together like poker chips. But generally, if you have tiles of different types, they're not going to stack. So
if like in Heroes Welcome, we'll get it later, you have the VP, the victory points, Vorpal points, which are hexes. Were those tiles or were they tokens?
Yeah, those are tiles imported as hex tiles. Yeah,
got it. Absolutely. And so, what is the defining token to tile?
So, all right. Custom? So, a token only has one image.
Got it.
Okay, a token only has one image, but the nice thing that tokens do is, and they can have thickness. The nice thing tokens do, it has this merge distance. Basically, the tokens, as you can see from the text, it will look at the transparency in your file, and it will cut the shape of the token to the transparency in your file. So if you want to make, for example, if you're making Skull Hollow by Pencil First Games, and you are making those giant meeples, one way you could do it is you could have an image that was whose transparency matched the shape of that, and you could bring it as a token. And it would just be, that's a way to make a meeple, for example. Or if you have something that's a funny shape.
So can you make, just using Skull Hollow for a quick second, you have the custom meeples, which are tokens, and I get what you're saying right now. But if I was making the bigger monster boards, that would also be a token, just the thin
you
one.
Could make, the bigger monster meeples, you could make them as a token.
Cool,
yeah.
Cool.
Or even, maybe the boards even, but I'm not sure. You probably want to do the boards. So that's the different kinds of things. Other important ones, if you have a custom 3D model, and I did end up doing some custom 3D models, and I'll talk about that. Some standees. The custom PDFs is how you bring your rule book in. So you can just bring in the PDF for your rule book, and then it'll be on the table for people to read.
Yeah, and that's it's just the rule book is just sitting there, and it has the TTS has a nice viewer that opens it and lets you jump to pages and things like that.
And the last one I won't talk about really is asset bundles. If you are a Unity wizard, you can make Unity asset bundles that contain animations and models. So if you're making a miniatures game and you want your miniatures to animate and do crazy stuff like that, that's a way to go. That's a really sort of professional sculpting path. And one note is that you can't do scripting that way. It won't bring your C# scripts in.
And I do hope we look at Heroes Welcome briefly after this.
Let's just go there now. Okay,
so for people to see just how much work, when there's a lot of tokens components in that game.
Yeah. So here's all the things, and there's a few things I didn't talk about, so let's talk about the loot tokens in Heroes Welcome. I originally brought these in as cards, but I re-imported them as tiles. And there's 50 of them. So that was, I came up with a clever way to do that. So here's the loot tokens. And one thing that I didn't talk about because it's not considered a component, it's considered a tool, is bags. You can You can make a bag and just put stuff in it. Bags can be shuffled. Uh, and you can use scripting to limit what kinds of things. So if I put a loot token in this bag, it goes in. If I put this random other token, it does not go in. You can see it's on the other side. You can see it fell off the other side. So through scripting, you can do things like limit what goes into a bag. So yeah, different kinds of things. My building tiles are cards. My loot tokens are tokens. Or tiles rather. I don't have any tokens in the game. I ended up either using exclusively tiles and cards. My potion tokens are tokens. One of the things you'll notice is that when I drop this, it's going to snap into place. And that I did that by adding snap points to the board.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I actually end up using those for scripting too. I have code to like find the snap points and move things to them. So for example, when I do things like close the Builders Guild, I don't have to know my game, but when I close the Builders Guild, it's going to replenish this.
Yeah. And I think that's something worth stressing here. Like, actually, I was, having played this with Mark, pretty impressed with a lot of the sort of one thing happens and the other things get scripted. All you're really doing in the simulator by adding that stuff is just like speeding up the play experience, but effectively, players can do all these things like they would if normally when I play a board game in front of me, it doesn't flip the cards automatically through magic, right? This is just simplifying and speeding up the experience, but it's certainly not necessary. I would not get...
Absolutely not necessary. And not only that, but like, don't get in the player's way, right? Like, the thing about Tabletop Simulator is that anyone who's coming here understands, or hopefully most of the people understand, that the game generally doesn't do rules enforcement. If you want to cheat, if you want to steal a loot token while nobody's looking, you can just totally do that, right? But the nice thing about that is that it allows you to make house rules and just play by them, and because the game isn't stopping you from doing that. And when you're scripting the game, you want to, if you're the developer, you want to think about how you can support and enable that. So in addition to bags, I was talking about bags. These are infinite bags. So I have all the coins in the game, and there's a special kind of bag called an infinite bag. You put a thing in it, and then it has an infinite quantity of this. So this is a bag full of infinite gold pieces. You can just, every time you pull one out, there's another one.
Holding right there.
Yeah.
You just need it.
Yeah. And so and this is just a standard component. It's in the tools menu. There's a bunch of cool tools, bags, infinite bags. There's clocks and counters and things like that you can do. You can even put a tablet on your table, and I've seen people put a tablet on the table and then be running Skype on the tablet or I don't know what thing they use, but they literally had their video chat on the table in 3D. And so one of the things I wanted to solve was, if you have this infinite supply of stuff, like, what do you do with it when you're done with it, right? And so one of the things you can do is you can just make a special bag that's the bag you just throw stuff you're done with, right? And so what I ended up doing is I bought this model on the internet. I paid like $20 or something for this 3D model on the internet, and I imported it. And when you import a 3D model, you can make it into a bag. So this bag is just the place where you put your coins that you've spent or you're done with, right? And I scripted it so that actually when you put it in there, it deletes them. So it really is just a trash can. Yeah, and I could have made it a trash can, but my game's kind of medieval themed, so or sort of World of Warcraft themed. So I felt like trash can was a little bit anachronistic, so I ended up making it. Oh well. Another couple things. Figurines are. Here's the heroes. They're called a figurine in the game, in the Tabletop Simulator. That's how I imported them. And basically uses the transparency of your image to decide what the shape of the standee is.
And you also do that for the stop signs, yeah.
Yeah, the closed signs, yeah.
If I might interrupt for a quick moment.
Yeah, sorry.
For those watching, if you're not familiar with Heroes Welcome is a game where, rather than playing as the adventurers or even as the minions and the monsters in the dungeons, you actually play as goblin merchants. And so in this game, players are moving the adventurers, that big token, through this town, and in the process stealing or buying the loot that they're carrying from the dungeon and doing transactions to get rich, and then essentially at the end of each round sending the heroes back into the dungeon to gain more loot and then to fleece them again. So
Yeah.
if you're not familiar, that was sort of like a sell on the game, which is fantastic, but also just to understand what this board looks like. Like there's this middle area where you're moving the heroes around, you're adding those stop signs, you're collecting loot, and you're leveling up some crafting and things like that. But that's the sort of basic idea of the game.
So here's some loot, and you buy loot from the heroes, and then you smash it into raw materials. So this smashes into mithril, that smashes into Ethereum, and then you use that to craft artifacts for the monsters to inhabit the dungeon. So this reanimated corpse wants a hook made. He needs a metallic thing, a brown square, and anything.
As the heroes get stronger, they need stronger enemies, right? With better gear.
Exactly. So you're kind of working both sides of the fence there. You're spying for the heroes and
on with your training.
Yes, on with the tabletop simulator stuff. So one of the things I did here, let me reload the game, and actually I'm just going to go all the way out to the main menu. And I'm just gonna this time I'm gonna make a hot seat game. So it's 4 players, but I'm gonna play all 4 players. Okay, so this is gonna be a little bit awkward, but probably should have made a save game for this. But so I'm gonna load the game. And the first thing that's going to happen is I have to just quickly pick colors for all the players. And I got the turn order weird, but that's okay. And then I'll just go load the game. Okay, so there is turn tracking in. It's optional. I did not integrate my game with it, but you can turn it on if you want. And then when you end your turn, it goes to the next person's turn, and you can set it up so that you're allowed to pass your turn to any player, which will be important in my game. But the thing I wanted to show off is, so I wrote some scripts to do setup. So this, I push this button and it does game setup. And like here, it hands out all of the tokens. It randomizes the first player, hands out cards and tokens to everybody based on the game setup. And the reason why I want to talk about this is not just to show it off, but like it deals out all these cards, is that I needed a place to put components that you're not using, right? Like, so in a 4-player game, there's components for the 5th player that are going to go unused, right? So originally I had a bag off in the corner that I would just have the setup script like stuff things into the bag. And what I ended up doing is making that bag into the game box. So,
which, I think is great.
And so, yeah, so you can search any bag. And so here you can see the components that are unused in the 4-player game, and also the rule books here. This was super easy to import. You can just import your PDF, and then anyone can. Oops! Oh no! What did I do?
You didn't. We're still on. I think you just either crashed or you closed.
Maybe I crashed. It's okay.
Wow! Look at that. This is real time.
Yeah, this is unscripted, without a net stuff, folks. Welcome to lockdown. Okay, so here we go. We're loading.
Yeah, they gotta update that art, man.
Yeah, it's weird. I would say that like for the kind of game that they make, the splash screen is a little bit not as family friendly as I would hope, but anyway, so I'm gonna just go ahead and do that again. Let's actually let's see if I have an autosave. Let's see if my autosave is where my autosave's at.
Boom.
It's got some stuff. It's not set up.
Well, so again, in that scripting sense, right? It just makes it easier to get the game set up, which is fantastic. People can play quicker, but also, Mark's doing some novel things, right? Adding the box for components. It's also a nice way to, as a publisher who's putting a game on this, it's a good way just to like, if people enjoy it and they want to go pick it up or see it online, they know what the box looks like. That's not a bad thing.
And yeah, it's really easy to get your rulebook in. Hopefully it doesn't crash for you, but it's really easy to get your rulebook in the game. Yeah, this is from before I did that. But So what are the other things I wanted to show? Yeah, so one of the challenges I had when I was doing the scripting is that here's the thing. Here's a deck of scam cards, and it's got 29 cards in it, right? The thing about decks is that they're not persistent, right? I'm going to take all the cards out. Let me just do this faster. I'm just going to hand out some cards.
Well, and it's going to disappear, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So once you take all the cards away, the deck is gone, and so you can't refer to it anymore. There's no object that is the deck anymore. I can make a new deck, but it's going to be a new object. And from a scripting perspective, a new object here. I just but that's a new object. So what I ended up doing is you'll notice that these decks here are actually bags, right? And they're 3D models, just textured cubes. They're just textured cubes that I made.
Folks, he faked it.
I faked it, yeah, and I had to learn Blender. Blender's a free 3D modeling tool just to make a textured cube. You can watch YouTube videos and stuff. So these decks are really bags, and so I can always refer to the bag. And when it's time for my scripts to put things, to reshuffle things or anything like that, I can just put them back in the bag, and the bag is just always there, right? So that's a handy trick that I used for that. So yeah, another thing I wanted to talk about, if we still have time, is I wanted to talk a little bit about rotation values, which is a feature of the engine that's the tabletop engine that's not super obvious. But so I'm going to throw a D12 into the game, and this is a nice thing about it. You can just add components to. Here it is. Here is welcome. Oh, we want to roll a die for some reason. You can just make a die and roll it. You don't need my permission to add components to my game, which is pretty cool. So here's a D12, right? And I can roll it and do all the normal things. But what I can do is imagine you wanted to make a special D12, right? Where the 12 was really a 0, right? So what you would do is you would go into the Gizmo tool. Yeah, now you're going to see a lot of crazy stuff here. This is all markup I did for scripting so that I can know where things are on the table. So the board and the customer zones and things like that. These are scripting zones that our user, you're seeing the man behind the curtain a little bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the rotation value tool, and this lets me edit what the numbers on the D12 are. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to change, I could, for example, edit this. And this is going to have two things. It's going to have what rotational position, and these are the rotation is expressed as 3 different angles, and what number that means. And so, for example, if I change this from a 12 to a 0, now all of a sudden I have a D12. Let's see if I can get it.
Now
I have a D12 who goes to 0 instead of 12. Okay,
but
now,
visually it's going to be a 12 because the art never changed.
Visually, it's going to be a 12 because of that, because I use the standard model. Now, if you import your own model, you imagine you can import a custom die and you can put whatever you want on the faces.
Right.
And so that's how you would control what the faces are. And I actually use this all over the place. So for example, it's used for dice, but you can use it for anything, right? So for these tiles, for example, their rotation values are just strings. So I have the rotation value for the text that's on the tile. So when I see this, its rotation value is tensor slip disk, and when I flip it over, its rotation value.
Oh, neat.
And that affects what you see. I also use that for scripting. You can actually, in the scripts, you can actually look at the rotation values of a thing. So the way I tell what this is I kind of pick it up and look at all the sides of it and see what it is. Another handy thing is you can use. So my coins, they have one rotation value. They're basically one-sided dice, right? Which is a little bit crazy.
And this was to get to the adding them up bit, right?
Yeah. This is, the reason I did that is so that if I multi-select these, it's gonna Tabletop Simulator. It will just add up the rotation values for me. So now I know that this total is 9 because I've got a 5, a 3, and a 1.
So actually, let me use that as a segue, both because we're running out of time, but for one remaining point here, which is, in making this, Mark iterated and play tested and tuned this many, many times in an alpha and a beta, and not a lot of it, but many of the changes are a product of the actual play experience of playing the game and seeing it, like, oh, I got all these coins. Do I got to like add them all up? Like, is that really the best we
Right,
can do? Or
right,
an,
exactly.
another one just from the last time we played, you can't. Mark is tucked the bags and stuff up closer to the board a little bit,
Yep.
and some other changes he's been making. But basically, because of the way this game was, he had it much more like using more of the table. But the result was that if I wanted to be on camera and be looking at the game and using the stuff, like I'd have to pull back further than I wanted to. So he basically sort of pulled things
Yeah,
in
so I
from a vision.
tightened things up so you could stay further zoomed in and still see a lot of the board.
Right.
Um,
And I don't know, I mean, there's just countless examples of like, well, that's a little weird. How can that be a better player experience? Or I was
right.
confused there, or one other thing was like tiles were stacking in weird ways at the top of the loot bags, and you fix that. Um, or
And
in too
while
predictable
we're
ways.
here, I would like to give a shout out to Carlos Molina, who has been giving me tons of free quality assurance on this thing. Every time I put up a mod, he's been playing it, giving me good feedback,
And
finding my bugs, that kind of stuff. And
and
I
out of
really appreciate it. Shout
curiosity,
out
is
to
that is
Carlos.
that somebody that you knew prior, or was that from the community?
Uh, I actually met Carlos at Essen this
Oh,
year,
cool,
just hanging out. But yeah,
awesome.
so shout
All
out to him.
right. Well, so I mean, again, this is I mean, I haven't played every tabletop simulator, but I would say that this falls into the advanced category. I think Mark has done a lot of things that are a step beyond what you might normally. So even if you're just curious to see what advanced might look like, check it out. Follow the link. But is there anything else you wanted to add, Mark, or mention?
Um, yeah, I have some pro tips. I'm just gonna run. Can I just run through them real quick?
Please.
Sure. Where's my pro tip? I'm gonna throw up some slides here. Here we go.
Slides.
I
This
have
is
it. Sorry. Slide singular.
so
So here are my tips. Okay, first of all, when back up your saved games. Like when you are making this thing, you're making a saved game. Find the saved game folder and just make a copy of it every once in a while. Trust me, you're gonna want to do that. Like I mentioned, bone up on Photoshop or GIMP or what did you say, Pixelmatic? Just find a really good paint program, image editing program, and get good at it because you're going to need that for editing the transparency on your standees or whatever, right? Keep your asset files local. When you get that global to local choice, keep it local until you're ready to upload. Let me make sure I talk about the upload ed after this. Just real quick. Don't forget to upload them when you do your upload, when you're ready to publish. Here's the thing that we didn't talk about, but your save game is all in a text format called JSON, and it looks like this. And this is just a very, very standard way of representing objects in the world. It's used all over the web. It's used in a lot of different kinds of technologies. But you can see that all of the numbers and things are completely laid bare in this format. And there's going to be moments where you're going to be like, oh, I need to change every single freaking card. Pull up this file and do a search replace. And if you can get comfortable doing that, you're going to be a lot happier. So this is a way to actually type text instead of having to do clicking on user interface at times. Like if you can get a big pro at that, like you're going to be pretty happy. And again, use rotation values, especially script metadata. But then go back and hold the Alt key on your thing and make sure that it's because the rotation value will affect how it looks when you hold down the Alt key. So go ahead and look, and then you're just going to adjust the Y rotation to fix that. Use bags of persistent text. You can import models and use them as bags. I definitely recommend that. Those are my pro tips. The
awesome.
one thing I wanted to do is we talked about keeping files local. There's a magic under the modding. There's a magic thing in Cloud Manager. So these are all the cloud-based. Here's all my files up on the cloud. Okay, so these have all been uploaded already. I mentioned that you should keep files local. There's a magic button right here. Okay, it says upload all loaded files. This will like all those files you kept loading. You push this button once, and it will upload all of them to the cloud. So that's the button you push. before you publish to Workshop. There will be a warning if you try to upload to Workshop and you haven't done it, but it's just red text that flashes by real fast and you can forget easily. And if you check the comments on my mod, you'll see that the one time that I forgot to do that. So learn from my mistakes. That's all. That's all I got.
Awesome.
How about you, Ed?
Awesome. So thanks, Mark, for taking us through the process you went through. This whole process. I really would suggest and certainly love for folks to check out Heroes Welcome on Tabletop Simulator. I think it's a great implementation of a great game, and if you like it, you can also buy it. The game that'd be great too. But certainly hope this makes Tabletop Simulator a little less daunting.
And we should end by showing the table flip button.
Shoosh! Flip the table. All right, Mark. That's awesome.
Right.
Thanks so much for your time. And we'll play this online again soon.
Good talking to you, Ed.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.